I do want to ask you a question, though, relative to what you were talking about with the band and doing your own material, because is it 38, 37, 38 years
oh, this
you've
band,
been?
yeah, 38 years.
And I'm through the, you've also, like Jim, sort of gone through a lot of different sonic identities, which have all been true to who you were at that moment. But I'm curious, because you were always writing from an early time, if your writing at that point was directly affecting your playing, and if so, in what way, and how would that be different than the way it is now when you're writing something and then come to
Yeah, that's a good
record?
question. We've talked about music, piano coming before drums, for example, for us. And for me, words were fascinating to me long before I knew what music was. And from a very young age, reading and writing rudimentary poetry and all that. So yeah, I started writing lyrics for the band early on and learned about that as I went. And it was a great gift, because words in song are as rhythmic as drum phrasing is. And so often I will hear a phrase, I always think of, I was traveling up in Glacier National Park and I heard two gray jays sing, and I think, two gray jays on a lodgepole pine. You know, there was music in those words, and the phrasing of them is much how I try to phrase drum breaks and soloing and all that sort of thing. But later, here's I think illustrative for all of you in acquiring another skill, is I got interested in prose writing and went to a pawn shop in Little Rock and bought a typewriter, talk about lost technologies, but started on that, and I worked on that for 20 years before I published a book, because I was, I had to grow up in public and music, which, obviously has its shortcomings, and your crayon drawings on the fridge that your mom might have saved. You might not want to look at those later in life, and that's the same when you start off too young. But in this case, I spent 20 years working on prose writing before I published anything, and then was able to learn so much, and again, great teachers. Another important thing, honestly, for me in drumming, I've had three really important and cumulative teachers of what they taught me. My first teacher, he gave me enough to work for 20 years on. And then when I worked with Freddie Gruber, he gave me, that was 15 years ago, I'm still working on that. And I worked with Peter Erskine 3-4 years ago now. And what he taught me, I saw him yesterday, was that I cannot believe that what he got me started on in terms of simple exercises and simple retraining of certain ways of thinking and understanding time nourished me so much now and have elevated me into a whole new level of improvisation for that tool that he gave me. And I went to him for a completely different reason. I wanted to work with him on understanding swing music and big band music better. But I committed to him, and when I wrote about the experience, I walked up to Peter's house with a pair of sticks in my hand, like I was when I was 13. Going to the Peninsula Conservatory of Music in St. Catharines, that humble, because why would you go to a teacher if you're not going to be that humble? So I felt all sheepish with my sticks and went in there, and he gave me exercises to work on. And again, as you get older with a busy life, it can be hard to practice. That happened to me when I studied with Freddie in the mid-90s. I knew with what he was giving me, I was basically going to have to start all over. And I was thinking, can I do this? Having a busy life and a family and other interests and so on, will I have that dedication? And yes, I did, because I saw the possibilities. It was a leap of faith. I didn't know where Freddie was leading me, and likewise with Peter, I didn't know where he was leading me, but the faith I had in him and the devotion to the craft, where I practiced every single day. And with Peter, it was just a hi-hat and a metronome. And he gave me the quiet count metronome, where you get 2 bars of click and 2 bars of silence. And he said, every day practice with a slow tempo and a fast tempo. And he gave me some play-along stuff of classic jazz drummers and Count Basie records and all that. So every single day I did that. I'd set up a slow tempo, and if you've ever done that quiet count thing, and I know other drummers of considerable skill think there's something wrong with that machine, because you get 4 bars of click, 2 bars of click, and 2 bars of silence, and at a slow tempo. And again, I was just playing hi-hat, but I was improvising and phrasing, and it never got tedious, it never got boring. And what I discovered, not about the hi-hat, but what I discovered about time, I couldn't believe in the next tour that I was out, suddenly, if the other guys in the band, if we got a little out of sync, suddenly I could hear 2 things at once. I could hear what was happening and what was supposed to be happening. And imagine what a gift that is in a live situation. But then when I started working on new material again, I found I could, that double layer of thinking could work, that I could improvise. I could think about what I was playing and what I might be playing, and what I could do with it at the same time. So that was a gift that came out of teaching and studying, that I had to give faith to it. Okay, this is worth my time. This is worth it. I don't know what's going to come out of it. Another example, the 3/4 waltz, the drum also waltzes. I spent so much time on that just because I love it. It's a beautiful warm-up. I never thought it would have any musical use. I used it in my solo. It was a lovely ostinato. So I basically played it every day, just for the sake of it, never thinking I'd get to use it. Well, sure enough, on one of our band albums, my bandmates are suddenly writing in 3 and 6 all over the place, and I had all this material to work with, and I suddenly had all the tools for it, and as if there was a trajectory coming together. So the lesson for all of you is, you don't know what knowledge is going to be worthwhile. It probably all is, one way or another, and also the dedication, you can't know how that's going to pay off. The amount of time you spend practicing, I just went on faith that this was going to be worth it, but I could not believe what it evolved into. And I was saying how it can nourish you for years. What Freddie led me through 15 years ago, and what Peter led me through 3 and 4 years ago, they're helping me grow, and I've been playing 45 years. To say I've evolved into a whole new musician in the last few years because of those tools and those skills that gave me that leap over, where Peter allowed me to dive into the deep end of improvisation with that gift of time control. So you can't know.
This is passion. What you just heard, that's passion. If you got even a little tiny bit of that kind of passion, you're on your way.
And Neil just said something that was also very important, which just triggered off something relative to everybody here about when Peter was telling you about you were using the rhythm coach, that the devil's metronome, that thing.
Yeah.
And what you were playing, and then what you thought you were playing, or what you heard you were playing. One of the things that, going back to the element of, well, how do I compose? A lot of people might be thinking, well, do I have anything to say? Or how do you compose? I mean, I think that it's just everything starts in very small steps. One of the things you can think about is, I'm sure everybody here has had the experience of hearing a drum beat and then maybe hearing something else, and they can hear it, but they can't quite play it. And so sometimes you have to create your own technique. The point of this is, I think that everybody here has probably had the experience of hearing something and going, oh, I want to play that. And you sit down at your kit, and you might have some approximation of that. We've all done that, but sometimes that approximation can be the thing that is a jumping off point. It's not the way somebody played it. And I mean, I remember when I first heard Elvin Jones and Mitch Mitchell and thinking, I had some technique, but I didn't quite know how to apply that to what I was hearing. But I could come up with something that emulated that. Now, that led me into other territory. The point of that is, in a sense, that's the first step towards composition. When you hear something in your head and you get it out. And Barry Altschul, one of my great teachers in New York, who's a great jazz drummer, he used to play with Chick Corea and now leads his own band. One of the most important things he used to make me do was he would sit at his little electric piano, and I'd sit at his drum set, and he'd say, sing a phrase. Okay, sing that, no problem. Play it. Ooh, that was difficult. And suddenly he was trying to narrow the distance between hearing it and the execution of it. And I realized that was okay. That the point of that is being able to sing something to yourself, and then sometimes you have to figure out how to orchestrate it on your drum set. And after doing that over and over, that began to narrow that gap a bit more. I mean, that's a lifelong pursuit, but you can take that as one of the first steps that you can use in composition, because if you create a drum pattern or an ostinato and something else that goes on top of a series of things. And Freddie Waits, another great drummer who I got to study with back in New York, had led something called Jazz Interactions, and it was Steve Jordan was in that class. He was only about 17, and myself, Brian Brake, Leroy Cloud, good class. And Freddie used to make us come up with something that the class would have to play. And that was one of my first efforts into writing something just for drums. So I could hear all the elements of what I wanted. I couldn't play them all because it ended up being 6 or 8 parts or whatever, but I could hear them. And he made me write it out, and then we would all play each other's compositions around the class. That was enormously helpful to me. Number one, to hear my own ideas, and sometimes even when somebody would make a mistake, as a composer will tell you, sometimes the mistakes can be the catalyst to take you off in a direction you never even imagined. So I wouldn't minimize the fact if you don't currently play guitar, piano, or clarinet or whatever, that doesn't mean you can't compose, because a lot of what Jim was saying goes back to that, where it was like found sounds with his bookshelf and the metal, and suddenly this opened up something for him that was a whole element of creating a foundation that was compositional in nature, and you've brought that just as a player because of the way you change your sound. And I look at that just as much as a valid part of the compositional process as any other part. So the point is not to be intimidated about that. A lot of people think, oh, I can't, I don't know enough about music to even think about that. That's not true.
You all know melody. You love melody. You have to love melody. It's everywhere. It's been from day one in your life, and it'll continue to be. Katy Perry, I love those little melodies of her silly songs.
Yeah.
With a sampled drum beat. But when you hear her live, she's got a real drummer.
And don't they all?
And he plays
I know.
good,
Don't they all?
Right, and he plays really good. He paid attention to the thing, and he's bringing his own thing to it.
The pop groups always have really great bands.
Yeah.
Live, but not on the records.
Yeah.
So, again, that's what students are up against. Okay, you might be lucky enough to be chosen for the live band of one of those, but you're not going to be playing on records in pop music today. That's
But it's up to
difficult.
them to make that happen. You said it a minute ago.
Yeah,
We're time.
and
it's
it can.
time for
and
a new.
the compositional tools, it can be used just for study. I was saying I learned just enough synthesizer work to make little exercise pieces to work on my marimba playing, and then later I would put drum parts on them and learn so much from that. It doesn't have to be something you're presenting to the world too. That's another thing. If you're in a band, there can be intimidation for bringing the drummer's songs. When does a band break up?
Run away.
When the drummer says, "Play me," when do we play my song? So it doesn't have to be something you impose on others. And again, what I was saying before, I learned how to play bar chords on guitar and all that just to learn their language, as it were. And every band kind of finds its own chemistry among that way. But I think even on your own, it's cool to do. If you can just work a little recorder on our computer and record some guitar tunes or a synthesizer pad, and then how would you play to that? That's what I love when you get a song you've never heard before, and this is where I'm leading with this. If you get a song you've never heard before, and you think, what do I hear there? And when I get a song from my bandmates, we've been involved in, because I write the lyrics and they write the music, so we've been involved collaboration. But when I get a demo from them, it's with a click track and one with a drum machine, because our guitar player happens to have really good non-drummer ideas.
Yeah.
So I encourage him, please give me your interpretation of the drum machine and
Sure.
give me one with just a click track. So I'll listen to what Alex comes up with, and honestly, it is sometimes some really good influences that a guitar player would come up with that a drummer wouldn't. But listen to the song just with a click track, and what would you hear there? Because that's what I'm hearing both you guys. There's an imaginary drummer, and that's an important part of it. Imagine what you would play there.
Yeah.
And that's something that Drum Channel has done, has taken a song and given it to 5 great drummers and seeing what they do with it. So I think that's a remarkable thing that you could introduce at this point.
Yeah, we do have a clip that we can show. It's very brief. You'd have to see each of the tracks in their entirety in order to really grasp how important the drummer is, not just in the band from the standpoint of being a musician, but how the influence the drummer has to the output of the music of a particular song. Jose, the clip with Gannon Arnold in his band, when they come out here, let's take a look at that, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. It's just a couple of minutes long. That's from a DVD where they actually play 19 songs. And the drummers, as you saw on the screen, were Terry Bozzio, Simon Phillips, Taylor Hawkins, Gary Novak, and Jimmy Chamberlin. And if you look at the bass drum and the way that they apply the bass drum to the song, that's what really impressed me the most. Some of them were playing the bass drum along with the melody more, and some were playing the bass drum more as part of the obvious drum pattern, both of which fit into the melody. But there's another interesting little clip that Chad Wackerman gave us as a result of him talking to a musician friend of his about the different types or levels of drummers they are.
The first one is, we need a drummer. They just, could be a show or something. They need somebody to go in, play good time, make all the hits, read well. The next level up of gig, Jim used to say, was they want Steve Gadd. Steve Gadd is not available, so they call you. So, in other words, they're looking for
not just a drummer,
but they're looking for kind of a specific personality, or somebody who brings something to the music that you're playing. That it's not a faceless kind of gig. It's not a more pedestrian gig, but they want a bit more stylized thing into it.
That's right.
And then he said the best kind of gig is when they call you, because they want what you do in their music.
And they call you gentlemen because they want what you do, and all the students out here who are looking for their identity and how they grow throughout that process. I think you've covered a whole bunch of you've made it very easy for me as a host, I'll tell you that, because I said hello and then...
This is a much more refined level too. I've been trying to keep it at the level of earnest passion. These are making very fine choices. When you listen, okay, here are five great drummers making their choices in the course of a piece of music, or what Chad is saying there too. Yeah, when you're able to make those kind of choices. And I was saying, when you have a blank piece of music, a song, and you face that probably more than any of us. What am I going to do with this? What do they want me to do with it? Even that's where it's decision making, and sometimes eliminating what doesn't work, accentuating what does work, and responding to the people that you're collaborating with. But that's a very big part of the creative process that comes in the partnership later, that you have to be prepared for, and the steps that Chad's mentioning. That's what you're all going to work upward toward, of course, of being in that position, of getting the opportunity because the other guy isn't available, and then giving something so valuable that they'll want you for it.
But there's also something that you said that where if you take a piece of music that somebody gives you and they want you to put your own personality into it, and you're lucky enough that they want your own personality, you also have to be open enough. Like when Alex, you said, give me a track with your thing, and then just give me a track with the click. And sometimes the stuff that Alex would come up with, you go, that's really good. And I've experienced that many times. People who are non-drummers can often have great ideas, and they are not impeded by the fact that, well, you can't really do this because this is over here. They're not even thinking about stuff like that.
It's the drum language.
That's your problem. That's right.
The drum language, they're not tied down to a drum language.
That's right. They hear it, and that's the important thing. So to the degree to which you can integrate that and actually really learn from something that stretches you considerably. Now, you may not be able to pull it off completely, and I've been faced with that many times where a non-drummer will give me something, and it'll be a great idea. I think, I'm going to use that. I'll figure out how to make a hybrid of that, and not discard it because, it's the guitar player, giving me the vocalist. Occasionally, they will have some seriously great ideas that it would never occur to you because we're thinking of, you can't do this when this is happening. Just the geography of the whole thing.
But all of you, as you came in, would look at the drum set that's behind us here in the room, or a drum set like you said, Jim, and you'd think about all the different sounds that you might be able to produce out of what you have at that particular drum set. Another thing that I think separates, if we're talking about these 3 degrees of you become a craftsman at your instrument, you become good enough to where you can duplicate what somebody else does, you become at the level at which they're hiring you because they want exactly what you do. If you were to walk into this room and see that drum set, how many of you would look up at the at the trussing we have and want to know how that sounded. Any hands? Would any of you? Well, I've got a story to tell here because
Yeah.
I happen to be the truss player for Jim, because when we had all of the trussing sitting down here on the floor, when we were building the studio, Jim happened to visit and played on some of that trussing, and, and we sampled it.
Beautiful because the room, you know, you're getting the room, and yeah.
So we held up the construction. We stopped the construction for 2 weeks. We got the audio gear in, and we actually sampled that. But but that's, you know, I guess what I'm hearing and saying is that that's the level that you don't want to be afraid to experiment and get to. You know, and is it a matter of just growth and getting as much experience as you can, or just thinking, you know, beyond the bounds, outside the box?
To further that point, there was a couple of things that happened when I was young and aware enough to make some note of it. And I put a little bit in that essay about the Lexington Avenue IRT in New York City between 86th Street and Astor Place. The rhythms this train would make. I actually sat there for the entire duration. I recorded an entire subway performance because I thought if I could play a drum solo as interesting as what I just heard, going across all the switches and the kind of odd bits of track, it was absolutely riveting to me. Similarly with the washing machine story where it played like a funny, you know, kind of triplety shuffle. I had a car that died, and as it was dying, it made the most glorious polyrhythmic sound. And I was out there in the driveway recording this thing because I thought, you can find this stuff, like you and the trusses, you know, you can find this stuff anywhere you look if you just kind of keep your ears open.
And the fundamental, the way rhythm permeates too. I was working here one time, rehearsing in here, and Terry Bozzio was working in the other room, and I was on my way home for the night, and I just stopped by to say goodnight to Terry, and he was playing in there on his jazz kit. Small kit. That was an ostinato on a foot djembe, a wood shelled djembe, and he was playing this ostinato and just doing variations around it. Boom, boom, ding, ding. I drive home about an hour from here. For my whole drive, I had that ostinato and variations in my mind, and all the way back the next day, and I had to come in and tell you. And it was a simple little thing, but so right. Yeah. And I've traveled a lot in Africa too, and being lying on the rooftop of a building at night and hearing drums echoing from across the valley, that I can still remember now, the pattern that they played and the way they sounded, because that was as fundamental and as primal as music gets. Obviously, jungles in the hills of Africa, or drums in the hills of Africa. So there's that fundamental thing, but that's what I'm saying. You can hear that in the hills of Africa, but I can hear that here at Drum Channel, just hearing Terry messing around with something that locked itself into my mind so powerfully that, again, I can still hear it today.